my Republican colleagues, and especially my Democrat colleagues. But this whole place is unserious about balancing the budget. And if you give them any exemption, they'll use it. And the reason, honestly, they're not that serious about it is because they can get reelected every time by telling people they can cut their taxes and increase spending and things are going to turn out fine. Well, that is not the case. I'm all for balanced budgets. I built this debt badge and I wear it to try and instill at least some sense of urgency among my colleagues. I gave one to every freshman member of Congress, and the only member who wears one is a Democrat because he wants to show how much the debt's going up under the Republicans, and he has a fair point. You know, I think the balanced budget amendment is one of those things that sounds good on the surface, but it's the exceptions that are written into it that get you. In fact, I voted against the balanced budget amendment when it came to the floor several years ago, and I'll tell you why. It said that if Congress, if both chambers of Congress vote with at least 60% of the members, they can undo the balanced budget amendment. That was the exception. Well, just a few legislative days prior to voting on the balanced budget amendment, we had just passed an omnibus with over 60% of the House voting for it, and obviously over 60% of the Senate voting for it. So when Mr. Biggs, our colleague on the Judiciary Committee, offered a balanced budget amendment, he suggested the threshold should be 2/3. So I went back and looked from 2016 until 2026 at all the CRs that have passed the House and the Senate and all the omnibus bills that have passed the House and the Senate. And it turns out that 11 of the 16 CRs passed with more than 2/3 vote in the House, and 14 of the 16 CRs passed with more than 2/3 vote in the Senate. The results are similar for the omnibus bills. But I believe my colleague here, Mr. McClintock, has suggested a 3/4 threshold. So what does a 3/4 threshold get you? Well, in 2024, the CR passed with 77% of the House, and 77% of the House in the next CR, 72% of the House, 74% of the House, 78% of the House, and finally in 2025, not too long ago here, the American Relief Act, the second CR of 2025, 84% of the House voted for that. That sucker wasn't balanced. What about in the Senate? 85%. There's literally almost no threshold you could put in there that they couldn't override and haven't overridden already. So, Mr. Walker, do you want to address that?
Yes, thank you, sir. Number one, you have to define what type of unexpected events can cause there to be a potential exception to the rule, and then you have to have a high enough threshold combined with those unexpected events to be able to limit it. And in addition to that, you have to say it's for year by year. In other words, you don't just get a pass, it's year by year. With regard to the convention, this is not a constitutional convention. The Federalist Papers make it very clear that the founders intended there to be Article 5 limited conventions. There are several safeguards to deal with your question, Mr. Raskin. Number one, a majority of the applications back in 79 and today are fiscal responsibility only. There's state delegate legislation.
Let me follow up, Mr. Walker, sorry.
Yes, sir.
On something you said, that you have to specify the exemptions, and one of those is war. I have tongue-in-cheek remarked that at least this would get Congress to declare wars again, because there's an exception if you declare war. This gives me some concern because I've watched them play budget gimmicks here with something called OCO, Overseas Contingency Operation. It's supposed to be for emergencies or for things that came up, contingencies, not expected, but they have used it to fund the basic defense of the United States, to replenish stockpiles and whatnot. And forgive me if I'm very suspicious of specific exemptions, because I've seen those, you know, they were statutory, not constitutional, but I've seen them abused here in the House of Representatives. I think the only thing that really works is you got to elect people who are serious about balancing the budget. The result of the big, beautiful bill and the CR and everything that's passed since then is that this year we've increased spending $200 billion. And next year we'll increase spending over more than $200 billion. But I mean, my colleagues are, my Republican colleagues, and especially my Democrat colleagues, but this whole place is unserious about balancing the budget. And and if you give them any exemption, they'll use it. And the reason, honestly, they're not that serious about it is because they can get reelected every time by telling people they can cut their taxes and increase spending and things are going to turn out fine. Well, that is not the case.
I love following Thomas Massie because he's very consistent. And I appreciate that because we can disagree on a whole host of things, but if you're consistent, it makes sense. I just find it really interesting that we're spending our time in the Constitution Subcommittee talking about a balanced budget amendment right after everyone on the other side, except for Mr. Massie, voted for a bill that dramatically increased the national debt. And so I think there's lots of other things that this committee should be working on rather than this. And the last time, I think the ranking member of the full committee said this, the last time there was a balanced budget was in the 1990s under a Democratic president, Bill Clinton. And that was achieved both by increasing taxes and revenue, taxes on the wealthiest and revenue, and decreasing spending, cutting defense spending. This last big, beautiful betrayal bill actually did the opposite. It reduced revenue by giving massive tax breaks to billionaires and corporations, and it increased defense spending. And it did all of that on the backs of cutting health care for tens of millions of Americans. So when we talk about this issue, I think we should remember that in his first term, President Trump followed Republican presidents like George W. Bush. He increased defense spending. He passed steep tax cuts for billionaires and corporations under his 2017 tax scam. In fact, in 2023, Americans for Tax Fairness reported that the richest 748 Americans' wealth topped a record high $5 trillion, up 77% since those tax cuts were passed, and that the debt caused by those Trump tax cuts were then used by Republicans as an excuse to cut services. And then this year, instead of letting those tax cuts for the wealthiest expire, what did Republicans do? They made those tax cuts permanent and then added some more in. So that gave the wealthiest Americans another $5 trillion in tax giveaways. And as I mentioned, defense spending went up by another $150 billion. More enormous amounts of money poured into the Department of Homeland Security to send all these masked ICE agents into our streets to kidnap and deport people and terrorize communities and give massive profits to for-profit detention centers. That bill, the big bad betrayal bill is what I call it, betrayal of the American people, betrayal of working families, increased the deficit by $3.4 trillion over the next 10 years on the backs of working families, while slashing $1.1 trillion from Medicaid, food assistance, other critical health programs. And now, Republicans have refused to extend the ACA tax credits so 22 million Americans can afford health insurance, even though doing so would cost less than 4% of the cost of the tax cuts for the wealthiest. So just make this make sense for me. I'm going to turn to you, Mr. Duke. Deficits are made up of two parts, right? Is that correct?
That is correct.
Revenues and expenses.
You got them.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. Can a balanced budget be achieved by the federal government just by decreasing spending?
It could be done mathematically by dramatically increasing poverty, causing millions of Americans to lose health insurance and not be able to afford groceries. So it's mathematically possible, but it's very unwise.
And do we need, to Mr. Massey's point, do we need a constitutional amendment to create a balanced budget?
Bill Clinton certainly didn't.
Bill Clinton didn't. And yet Republicans have done the exact opposite, as I mentioned. They've increased the deficit, handed out tax breaks, and now they want this is really rich, a supermajority vote to increase revenue or raise the debt limit but not a supermajority vote to decrease revenue or lower the debt limit. So what effect would this one-way ratchet have on the payment of federal benefits like Social Security?
Sure. So anytime a Congress comes that wants to cut spending, they can do it. And any Congress that then tries to reverse it by raising revenue would not be able to do it. So it would be a one-way ratchet where benefits, services, eventually Social Security and Medicare finds themselves on the chopping block because there's just not much room left.
People feel like this is a rigged economy because it is a rigged economy. It is rigged for the wealthiest. And people across the country are seeing this now. That's why Donald Trump's poll ratings are as low as they've ever been in this term and almost as low as right after January 6th. Because people can't afford health insurance. They can't afford basic food. They can't afford to live. And meanwhile, a very small group of people at the top are just having it big. And this is just another way to continue that cycle.